It's my honor to introduce our next guest. He is a partner at Fenbushi Capital, Remington Ong. Are you with us, Remington? Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Awesome. Take it away, Remington.
Awesome. Thank you, Stu. Hi, everyone. My name is Remington, and I'm a partner at Fenbushi Capital, one of the earliest and most active blockchain VCs in the world. First off, I want to thank the ChainSafe team for putting this amazing event together and giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts here at the first of what I hope will be many, many CSCONs to come. And I'm truly humbled to be speaking alongside some of the greatest builders in the space, including key contributors from Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, Polkadot, Cosmos, Filecoin, Ava, and so many other communities. To me, it speaks volumes about the ChainSafe team that they were able to bring all of these people together, all from these different communities, all onto the same virtual stage today. And I believe they were able to do so because ChainSafe themselves have contributed so much to so many of these communities as well. I still remember the first time I met Aidan. We were having coffee in New York and chatting about some of the different blockchains out there. And the one thing that really resonated between us, the thing that got us both so excited that we just couldn't stop talking about it, was just seeing how all of these great projects in the space could come together and build something much, much bigger than the sum of its parts. And it was this shared vision of interoperability and collaboration that brought Fenbushi and ChainSafe together. And it's this vision that I wanted to share a little bit with you all today on why I think that collaboration and interoperability will lead to a better Web3. Now, there are three main reasons that I think that interoperability and collaboration are critical for building out the Web3 ecosystem. One, decentralization requires diversity. Two, interoperability unlocks potential. And three, co-opetition drives evolution. And I'll go into more detail about each of these today, but first let me start off by sharing why I believe that decentralization requires diversity. How many of you recognize this picture? This was the scene at the Hyatt Hotel in Shanghai, early morning September 18, 2016, just before the first day of DevCon 2 began, when a denial of service attack was launched against Ethereum nodes running the official Geth client. Fortunately, all of the core devs just happened to be in the same place, and some of them even got up early due to jet lag. So within hours, they were able to scramble and quickly deploy an update to the Geth client and advise all miners to update their nodes ASAP. But then a mere 4 days later, on September 22nd, it happened again. A second attack was launched, this time taking a longer time to fix. As such, the Ethereum Foundation advised on its blog for miners to quickly switch to the parity client, which again, the miners were able to do relatively quickly. And this allowed the network, the Ethereum network, to keep running while the core devs implemented longer term fixes, which resulted ultimately in 2 hard forks in October and November of that year. And this is just one example. This is a case where having more than one client keeping up the Ethereum network gave some redundancy, which allowed the network to continue running stably, even in the case of bugs or malicious attacks. This next image is the logo, which you may or may not recognize, but there's a high probability that you rely on it if you're in the crypto community. And Infura is an infrastructure provider, which runs Ethereum nodes that provide API feeds for services to read and write data to and from the Ethereum blockchain. While Ethereum itself is a permissionless network where anyone is free to run their own node, some crypto companies will leverage services like infrastructure to run their leverage services like Infura to run their infrastructure in exchange for convenience and efficiency. Now, 3 weeks ago this year, on November 11th, a massive outage occurred on Infera's mainnet API due to outdated software, which led to a brief and intentional chain split, disrupting a wide range of services, including Binance, the largest crypto exchange in the world, and MetaMask, one of the most widely used Ethereum wallets. While Binance was able to resume withdrawals within an hour, and Infera was able to resume its API to full access within 7 hours, this reignited debate around how decentralized Ethereum really was when an outage of a single provider would be able to cause such widespread issues. Now, decentralization. This is one of the key value propositions of crypto and blockchain. And people often proclaim that one of the key reasons to decentralize is to reduce single points of error or attack. So then why is it that when we speak of decentralization, we usually only refer to it in the context of consensus nodes? Of course, one of the blockchain's greatest innovations is solving the Byzantine generals problem, hence the focus around the distribution of these consensus nodes. But as these two examples earlier show, even in a decentralized network with tens of thousands of distributed nodes like Ethereum, there may still be centralized points of failure on different layers of the stack, whether it be in appliance software or API providers. Hence, this pushes us to think that when we think about decentralization, we should not only limit ourselves to the consensus layer, but remember to look at all the other layers as well. And oftentimes, what this means is diversity in that stack. So for instance, ETH2 currently has 7 different client implementations written in 7 different programming languages. And this even includes the JavaScript client Lodestar, which is developed by ChainSafe itself. This multi-client paradigm reduces the likelihood of a network-wide failure. So if there are vulnerabilities later discovered in one of the clients, or even on one of the underlying programming languages, there will be several redundancies where one can switch to. Furthermore, this multi-client paradigm, 1, helps to attract a broader base of developers familiar with each of the different programming languages they're implemented on. 2, encourages healthy competition among the different teams so that they will all push each other to improve over time. And 3, this even allows for optimizations for different use cases, such as, for example, Nimbus, which is targeted at mobile and embedded systems. So by taking this same logic, I would argue that the entire blockchain ecosystem on the protocol and the base layer level, in order to really promote decentralization, also needs to have a diverse set of protocols to build on as well. So if future dApps could be decentralized across different blockchains, this would not only enhance security and robustness, but also allows for optimization for specific use cases and fosters innovation as well. So that's what I mean first when I say that decentralization requires diversity. But if we were to have a space with so many different protocols, how will developers choose which one to build on, and how will users choose which one to use? And I think that's irrelevant because this leads me to my second point, that interoperability unlocks potential. Now, who here has actually seen one of these before? No, these are not 3D printed save icons. They're floppy disks, the boomer version of USB flash drives, which hold a whopping 1.44 megabytes of storage. More specifically, the ones that you see here, these were installation disks for some of the popular online services back in the 80s and 90s, including AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy. And if you install the software on the disks and combine that with the modem, this one right here was actually my first one. It's a Hayes model which runs at a whopping 9.6 kilobits per second, probably just slightly faster than the connection that I have right now. But anyway, you connect with a modem that goes beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, in order to log into what was one of the first online experiences widely available to the public. Now, notice that I used the term online service and not the internet or the World Wide Web. It's because in the 80s, these services were each individually closed networks that actually could not communicate with each other. So someone who used CompuServe, for example, would not actually be able to send an email to his friend who might have signed up for Prodigy instead. And each one of these networks ultimately attracted their own particular niche audience. So for example, CompuServe built one of the best online forum communities, so it attracted a lot of techies and nerds. GE's Genie platform was the best for online gaming and therefore deployed one of the first massively multiplayer online RPGs on the platform. While IBM's Prodigy was optimized for news and magazines and attracted more business users. But individually, none of these services were able to gain significant traction, and by the end of the 80s, each one of them had less than 1 million users. So it was only with the introduction of two key initiatives in the early 90s that really led to the boom of the internet. The first is something called the Commercial Internet Exchange, or CIX. And this was the first effort to create a common set of rules that all internet service providers agreed to in order to freely route traffic across the different networks. So even though all of them were running some form of TCP/IP on the protocol level, they were actually not delivering the same packets under the same set of rules. But with the CIX, when the internet service providers came together, for the first time, users of each of these different services could now easily communicate with each other and access all the information and all the software that may exist on all the other networks. So that guy earlier who was on CompuServe, he would finally be able to send an email to his buddy over on Prodigy. The second is the World Wide Web, which today we use interchangeably with the internet and think about it as sort of what we access on a daily basis. But in this context, World Wide Web actually refers specifically to the hypertext system, which was devised at CERN, along with its associated protocol HTTP and language HTML. Whereas the CIX enabled low-level networks to communicate with each other under a common set of rules, the World Wide Web enabled the application layer, the browsers and the individual websites that people saw, to link directly to any other content on any of the other networks. So with the combination of these two technologies, people were no longer restricted to what was available on AOL versus CompuServe. And this, in my opinion, is what unlocked the exponential growth that led to the dot-com bubble in early 2000 and led to continuous growth in the internet today. This huge, immeasurable cloud of information full of possibilities that we continue to enjoy to this day. Now, what does this all have to do with the blockchain space, you ask? I believe right now we are still in the AOL versus CompuServe kind of stage of blockchain development, where we have different protocols, each attracting sort of a specific set of users, kind of all building what looks quite similar, but not yet really talking together. And someday in the future, we're all going to look fondly back at our ledger wallets, just like we look at this floppy disk earlier, as early devices that allowed us to access this brave new crypto world. But as of right now, we're seeing some dApps that are being built on Ethereum, some dApps that are being built on Polkadot, on Ava, and so forth. And each one of these networks right now, they have their own pros and cons and their own focus areas, and that's fine, because we're still in this early stage of development. But what truly excites me is the potential that could be unlocked once all of these networks seamlessly interoperate. People can then build dApps that leverage on one blockchain strengths, which interacts with another blockchain, another dApp, which may be built on another blockchain. So imagine, for example, a 1 million transaction per second DEX, which may be built on a DEX that's optimized for TPS. But then this connects with, say, a zero-knowledge multi-sig custody solution, which may be built on a specific MPC optimized chain. And then this might drive a prediction market, which is then built on the third chain, which derives Oracle data from lightweight blockchain, which is optimized for IoT sensors in the wild. So this is just one example, but to the end user, they don't really know or care which blockchains each of these components are running on. All they experience at the end is this one seamlessly running killer app, just the way that we access our internet apps today. So one thing to bear in mind as well is that the internet, even today in 2020, is not technically sort of one network, but it's really a network of multiple interconnected networks as well. So here I am in Shanghai with a terrible connection, sorry about that again, but connecting on the China Telecom network, while you may be in the US or Canada connecting over AT&T or Rogers or another one of your sort of really local networks. But because all of them have this common language, all of them communicate with each other and seamlessly operate with each other, um, this allows us to not have to say, oh, we're running this web stream on AT&T or Rogers or China Unicom. This is just on the internet. And in the same way, I think it is only when we allow all of these different blockchains that we have built so far to connect together and allow developers the choice to build on any platform they choose, which may be best suited for their purposes. Only at this time, we will reach a point when users don't need to care whether they're running an Ethereum dApp or whether they're running a Solana dApp. They will just be using a dApp, period. So that's what I mean when I say that I think interoperability will unlock a lot of potential and really sort of build something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Finally, I want to share with you why I think coopetition drives innovation. And no, that's not a typo. This word coopetition, as you may have noticed, is a combination of two words, cooperation and competition. I don't know if you guys remember these ads. Hi, I'm a Mac, and I'm a PC. Even if you haven't watched it, it's not hard to guess from the picture which is which. And these are ads that were run by Apple in the mid-2000s to poke fun at the Mac versus PC war, which was all done in good fun. But back in the 80s and 90s, this war was serious business, with numerous lawsuits flying across both sides and accusations of stealing from each other. And among its users, it created a tech divide in the nerd world, not unlike the political climate that we have today. So in those days, I was still a kid at school, and although my first interaction with computers started with the Apple IIgs and the original black and white Macintosh, I had eventually grown fond of the flexibility of the Windows ecosystem because I had built my first desktop PC from scratch and loaded up all the different components together and loaded up all the drivers in Windows and sort of seen this kind of more open platform where I was able to customize and build something to my own liking. Some of my classmates, on the other hand, were obsessed with Marathon, which was a popular first-person shooter in the day, which was developed by Bungie Studios, which ironically later on was acquired by Microsoft. But anyway, because there were killer games like this that ran on the Mac, there were fanboys that really believed that sort of Mac was the better solution than Windows. So fanboys like us would literally get into scrawny, nerdy fistfights over whether Mac or PC was better. And this was kind of the climate in the 90s, where there was this kind of tension between the two camps. So, which is what led to what happened in 1997, something completely unthinkable happened. Steve Jobs had just returned to Apple at this point, and he recognized that this war with Microsoft was distracting both companies from their business. So at that year's Macworld Expo, the holy grail of kind of the Mac fanboy world, Steve Jobs took the stage and beamed and introduced Bill Gates over this giant projector screen while the audience booed. And this is what you see over here, where he announced Microsoft would be investing $150 million into Apple and committing to 5 years of development of Microsoft Office for the Macintosh. At first glance, it looked like Microsoft had won and Apple had lost this war. But did it really? Because if both companies continued devoting their resources to fight what was essentially a zero-sum war, Apple might not have launched the iMac the following year in 1998, and eventually developed the iPod, which they launched in 2001. At the same time, if iMac didn't launch, it might not have pushed forward new technologies like CD-ROM drives and USB connectors. Because if you lived through that time, you may know that things like floppy drives came standard with computers, and iMac kind of really pushed the envelope on that by getting rid of the floppy drive and forcing people towards CDs and USBs. So really, kind of, if both sides had continued to devote resources to this fight, you might not have seen the innovation and explosion that sort of evolved into the newer technologies that we see today. More importantly, fast forward to now, 2020, Apple and Microsoft are now the #1 and #2 most valuable companies in the world, each valued at over $1 trillion. And the significant thing is that they have evolved into something completely unrecognizable from their former selves. Apple now makes over 70% of its revenue from devices like iPhones and watches, while Macs only account for less than 10% of their revenue. Microsoft derives 60% of its revenues from enterprise software and cloud services, and Windows accounts for less than 15% of their revenue. And even to this day, Office continues to be one of the most important pieces of software on the Mac platform and iOS platform, while iPhones play nicely with Windows machines as well. So while the two companies may continue to compete on some individual fronts, ultimately this friendly co-opetition, this kind of putting aside the war and working together in the space, really helped both companies evolve into so much more than what they used to be, more than just two operating systems fighting with each other. So I would think that, again, right now, the blockchain space looks a little bit like Apple versus Microsoft in the 80s. It looks like we have a bunch of competitors that are offering early versions of their products, which aren't that highly differentiated yet, and some of them may even have taken some ideas from the others. So we're at a stage when we have a number of blockchains that are fighting over a very small market. But fighting each other over a piece of the current small pie is counterproductive to everyone. Launching Office on the Macs ultimately helped Apple grow, while iMac pushing the USB standard helped PCs become more versatile. And these technologies helped both platforms to become interoperable, which also allowed these companies to evolve into very different companies focused in very different areas, but both incredibly valuable. So in the same way, I believe that if different blockchain protocols collaborate with each other, share features with each other, this kind of co-opetition would inspire a level of innovation in the space, such that although today in the short term, a lot of these protocols look like they're doing something similar, this will allow the space and allow each of these projects to grow and evolve into something which might become completely different but valuable in a whole new way many years down the road. So this is, to summarize, my 3 key points today. One is that I believe decentralization requires diversity. 2 is that I believe that interoperability can unlock a lot of potential in the space. And 3, I believe that co-opetition in the space will drive evolution and innovation. And it's these 3 ideas that make me believe that collaboration and interoperability in the space will ultimately lead to a better Web3. And thank you very much for bearing me today. I hope some of this was useful to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Remington. Truly appreciate your kind words and also your fantastic analogies, most notably Boomer flash drive, which I'll be appropriating for my own use moving forward. We have some audience questions for you.
Sure.
First one being, what is a core component you believe is missing within the blockchain ecosystem?
So I think that there's still a lot missing, right? What I see is that blockchain is kind of one part of the stack, just like TCP/IP or even some of these sort of online services is only one component of the stack. So if you think about, let's take an application like Uber, for example. It's a killer app. People find real value from it. And sure, you can call Uber an internet app, but the internet itself, TCP/IP itself, is not sufficient to enable something like Uber. You need sort of the convergence of mobile devices, of GPS, of sort of big data traffic analysis and resource allocation, and sort of all of these kind of different technologies together to come together to really build a killer app like Uber. So using that analogy, I would say that blockchain and kind of this consensus layer that a lot of us are focused on is kind of like the TCP/IP. It's one piece of the puzzle. It forms an important part of the underlying layer, but there are many different sort of components that may still be missing. So over the next few years, I think what will be quite exciting is kind of the convergence of a lot of these technologies, convergence of AI and IoT and self-driving cars and many other things. So I would argue that there are still kind of numerous components that are missing to really come together for a killer app.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, I think we can all agree that the best is yet to come with blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next we have, so you have seen the evolution of technology from boomer flash drives to now. Obviously, I wasn't the only fan of that reference.
Mm-hmm.
What evolution phase will blockchain need to enter to reach mainstream adoption?
Like I said, right, I think that blockchain right now is kind of in the dial-up world because back then you required kind of clunky interfaces like modems, which clogged up your phone lines and operated very slowly and so forth. And these are some of the sort of same arguments and complaints that we hear from sort of the blockchain, the crypto user experience right now. I mean, right now it's very difficult for me to convince my mom, for example, to be able to sort of participate in DeFi and buy crypto and borrow some crypto on some of these DeFi platforms because sort of the user experience is just still so clunky. So I think that in terms of kind of the evolution, we are at sort of that dial-up stage where this is really kind of a test bed for a lot of us early adopters in the space. So you would need to kind of evolve better key management tools, better kind of integrations and better user experience to really get into sort of that mainstream adoption that you're talking about.
Yeah, it definitely seems like we're at the bare metal phase of this kind of technology, and UX moving forward is going to have to be kind of, like you said, a very critical component for mass adoption. So the next question is, how do we get blockchain companies to cooperate when most of these companies are so decentralized and community driven? Whereas Apple and Microsoft only needed 2 CEOs to come to an agreement.
So I would think that that there are pros and cons to sort of having this decentralized community and governance as well, right? So first is that to some extent, a lot of these projects in the space still aren't really that decentralized. I think that sort of decentralization is kind of a spectrum, a gradient where eventually sort of these projects kind of will give over governance over to the community, but a lot of them are still kind of driven by the core teams and the core developers of this. So I think one of the interesting things that's been happening over the past few weeks is these so-called mergers of some of the protocols of sort of Yearn and Cream and Pickle and so forth. And even though they're community apps, there's still kind of like lead devs that can kind of push towards this direction, say that, hey, all of us devs, we're going to work together and kind of combine the value of these two protocols into one. So I think that that's just one model. That's not to say that sort of all blockchains will kind of work together in the same model, but I'd say that part of this comes from collaboration, right? I mean, say Zcash and Ethereum are kind of very blockchains, but the ZK Snarks tech is something that interesting that may or may not be sort of that may be interesting to be implemented on Ethereum. So the collaboration between the Zcash Foundation and Ethereum Foundation, and same thing we're seeing this for Filecoin and Ethereum and sort of integrations going on into space. So like this kind of collaboration, it doesn't need to be mergers. It may just be sort of together on one or two pieces, one or two components of the technologies that kind of make sense and align incentives across both platforms.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean that really is the beauty of open source code as well, too.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, Remington, thank you very, very much for taking the time to speak with us today. fantastic presentation, and yeah, always very excited to hear from an industry veteran and a technology veteran as well. So again, thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, ChainSafe. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Thank you.